So today I want to revisit the MacBook Air M2 in 2024 because Apple surprised us by keeping this in the range alongside the M3 model, and honestly I feel like it's hands down the better buy, and I'll explain why I think this in today's video. Now FYI, I will be including the 15-inch M2 MacBook Air in this review as well, considering the larger model so similar, but do remember that's not officially sold by Apple anymore, so my review is mainly focused on the $999 13-inch M2 model that Apple still sells. So let's begin with the performance, because when this MacBook came out there was a massive fuss about this thermal throttling and it overheating, but that's not really been the case for me. I've been pushing this MacBook by editing videos and making thumbnails on it on a daily basis, and not once did I see this Mac struggle. Now yes, you could argue my content is pretty basic, which is a fair point, but it's still a lot more intensive work for a MacBook Air than what most regular folks are gonna do on these machines. So the fact I've had zero performance issues should tell you M2's plenty powerful. Please do not worry about this being fanless. I've also had zero issues with the M1 MacBook Air, and I've had that since launch, which was nearly 4 years ago. So yes, Apple's silicon honestly works like magic. Especially if you're someone who's a student and you're typing out documents and watching videos. For that kind of usage, you should not worry one bit. The base M2 is completely fine and should be good enough for long-term usage. Now I know people are going to bring up the slower SSDs the base M2 has, and don't get me wrong, it does suck that Apple even did this in the first place, but at the same time, most probably won't notice a difference. Not everything on paper translates into real life usage, because my M1 Air that has a faster SSD did not feel much faster than the M2. In fact, I'll be honest, they perform about the same for my workflow, which is very impressive because yes, M2 is faster, but it has less RAM and the slower SSD of course. And actually, the RAM really did surprise me because I got the M1 Air with 16 gigs of RAM in case 8 gigs was not sufficient for editing, but surprisingly, I've yet to run out of RAM with the M2. I've had no issues with memory swap as well because of the single NAND SSD, so yes, 8 gigs is actually pretty usable. Now I still think you should ideally get 16 gigs if possible, because while it won't make a difference right now, it could be beneficial as the machine gets older, but if you are on a tight budget, 8 gigs of RAM here is perfectly fine, especially for those doing the basics like web browsing and emailing. Let's now move on to the design, and I must admit, I was wrong to quickly dismiss the design language that was introduced to the MacBook Air with the M2 refresh. I was pretty salty about the wedge dyeing, but only after interacting with this MacBook in person, I've come to appreciate the thinner chassis. I also do like the softer corners because the M1 Air and basically all of the 2016 era MacBooks have very sharp corners, which are easy to dent and scratch, and that's no longer the case with the M2, which I very much like. You know what else I would like to see? You subscribing to the channel, of course. I would greatly appreciate it, and it would bring you the latest about the world of Apple right to your subscription box, so please consider it. It would be appreciated. We're trying to hit our next milestone of 16,000 subscribers, so join the Saranbyte gang now. Obviously, the M2 does get full color choices, and whilst everyone's likely still going gaga for midnight for whatever reason, I much prefer the classic silver, and I have to say it has aged incredibly well because unlike midnight, which is basically a coating that can wear off, silver is basically the natural color of this MacBook, so yes, it still looks fantastic and I love it. And overall, it's pretty crazy this is a near 2-year-old design at this point because it still feels very fresh for the most part. I can understand why Apple recycled the same design for the M3 because it does still look very modern. Now moving to the display, this essentially has the same panel Apple's been using on MacBooks for years. In fact, apart from the notch, which by the way has never bothered me, and also the high brightness, which I don't care about as such because I'm using my MacBook indoors anyways, this is the same LCD panel the M1 MacBook Air has, as well as every other MacBook since around 2015. Now that might sound like a bad thing, but honestly it's not, because Apple nailed their displays on their Macs early on, and so as a result, this is still a fantastic panel today. Yes, it lacks some of the fancy features like mini LED and 120Hz that the MacBook Pros offer, but I can personally look past this, and I still enjoy watching YouTube videos, movies and TV shows on this machine. Now, the M2 MacBook Air shares the exact same webcam as most modern Macs. It's 1080p and it does do the job for the most part. However, I will say you're better off using continuity camera because the quality your iPhone produces is frankly much better. Audio mic wise though, this Mac is excellent. I've really enjoyed streaming Spotify on this MacBook with the speakers, and I'm surprised at how good they are because these are not front-firing speakers, it's actually tucked behind the hinge. I've also been told by friends I sound crystal clear with these mics when I do the occasional Discord calls, so yes, they're fantastic, and here's a sample for you guys. And here's a webcam test for you guys. I should sound pretty good. The visuals should be decent enough. So yeah, let me know how this is. The keyboard is also terrific. I know some have mentioned the keys feel mushier compared to the M1, but that's not been the case for me. They're still solid. And oh my god, is the trackpad perfection. Every time I use a Mac, I come to appreciate how incredible Apple's trackpads are, because when I used to use Windows laptops, that was the one thing that sucked on all of them, and it seems Apple's really the only manufacturer that can nail this part of the experience. Touch ID has also been very reliable, and the ports on this actually have low-key been a game changer for me because we now have MagSafe. Now, it's actually not to do with the fast charging or the fact it gives you a very satisfying magnetic connection that easily comes off, but it's more to do with the fact I now essentially have an extra port. You see, with the older M1 Air, I would have to use one USB-C port for charging, and so for the peripherals I connect to my Mac, they only had access to one port. However, now with the M2, I can use MagSafe to charge the machine, and there's two ports for peripherals, which I do appreciate. The battery life is also something I greatly appreciate. Back when I got this MacBook, it would only drop from 100% to 87% when editing videos for 2 hours, which is very intensive work for a machine, and yet I barely lost any juice. Now for reference, my old Intel MacBook Pro would be close to dead once I finished editing for 2 hours, and so this is easily the best thing about Apple Silicon Macs. They last forever, guys, and the battery life should impress everyone. Especially for those doing very light work like emailing, browsing, watching videos. These MacBooks are gonna last forever. Now obviously do note I said back then, because obviously after long-term usage, the battery health has dropped, and so it's slightly worse now in terms of endurance, but it still gets me through a day pretty easily, and I've also found the M1 Air has been fine for long-term usage, so you shouldn't have to worry about the battery life getting considerably worse after a few hours of use. So those are basically all my thoughts regarding this M2 MacBook Air, and on the whole, guys, it's not the most exciting product in the world, but it's definitely very solid. I like the design, I like MagSafe, the performance for my usage has been surprisingly good, even when it's the base configuration, and if this meets your specific requirements, then yes, I would highly recommend it. This MacBook nails the basics of what makes a great computer. And what's even better is that the M3 MacBook Air Apple just released is basically the same, if I'm being honest. Down to the design and even the colors, it looks identical, and it really only has a new chipset that's slightly faster. It supports 2 external displays instead of one on the M2, but that's with the laptop lid closed, so it's not much of an advantage, to be honest. And also the SSD is faster on the base configuration, and the midnight color is more fingerprint resistant. Now I know some of you guys might be thinking, the M2 is $999, the M3 is $1099, those small changes do add up and make the $100 premium for the M3 worth it, right? Well, yes, if you exclusively shop through Apple, you could justify the additional cost for the M3, but remember that if you shop literally anywhere else, you can find the M2 MacBook Air for much less. I've seen the M2 Air go for $899 in the US. It can be found for even less if you're willing to buy refurbished, which I do recommend, especially Apple Refurb, because their products are basically brand new. I'll leave a link to my video regarding that in the icon above. But also in the UK, I've noticed the M2 Air is considerably less, and so it's a no-brainer to go for the older machine that's 95% identical to the brand new M3. Also, for those who want that bigger display the 15-inch offers, the M2 version of that is still available through third parties as they clear existing stock they have, and so yes, I would 100% go for those over the M3 models. And remember, with the $100 or $200 you save by going with the M2, you can of course upgrade the RAM or storage. Apple refurbished MacBook Air M2s with 16 gigs of RAM are still cheaper than the base M3, so yes, highly consider going refurbished, but ultimately save your cash and go with the M2. Anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and thank you for watching.